Well, let's go ahead and get started in the text itself. We are going to be looking at. We're almost done here. We basically got 2 more weeks left on Job, and so today we're going to look at Elihu's speeches. Now, if you have been paying attention to any of the Anglican news in the last 2 or 3 days, all sorts of crazy stuff has happened, which is kind of neat. We're not going to talk about that till we're done with Job. But I do want to talk about that because some of that's pretty important. So not next week, but the week after that, we'll talk about that, and that'll give me chances to make sure that I got facts straight and aren't saying things wrong anyway. But today, Elihu's speeches, beginning with Job 32. So Elihu, we haven't even seen him before. He was not one of the 3 friends. He just kind of shows up out of nowhere, to the point where some of those that don't really, the higher criticism folks who don't really think that the Bible really is inspired, they often kind of wonder, well, maybe Elihu is just an insert later because we just never heard from him before. And we'll find out next week, God doesn't even talk to Elihu. Elihu just kind of shows up and he disappears, and we're like, okay, well, there we go. That was a thing. That happened. That's how it goes with Elihu. But he does have these 6 chapters that he does speak on. And so 30 and 32 he begins, and what we see is that Elihu is a young man, and he's kind of angry at these guys. So let's just look at the beginning of 32. So these 3 men ceased answering Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Then the wrath of Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite, of the family of Ram, was aroused against Job. His wrath was aroused because he justified himself rather than God. So Elihu thinks that Job is not speaking right about God, but that Job is really trying to justify his own self. And that is making him mad. But also, his wrath was kindled, in verse 3, also against his 3 friends his wrath was aroused, because they found no answer and yet had condemned Job. We talked about this last week a little bit, didn't we? How the 3 friends, for all of their accusations and all of their, it seems to make sense, they actually don't address what's happening with Job. They haven't actually shown that Job's done anything wrong. And so this makes Elihu mad. Verse 4, now because they were years older than he, Elihu had waited to speak to Job. When Elihu saw there was no answer in the mouth of these 3 men, his wrath was aroused. So Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite, answered and said, and so we begin his speech. I am young in years, and you are very old. That's a good place to stop. No, I'm just kidding. Let's have pages. I am young in years, and you are very old. Therefore I was afraid and dared not declare my opinion to you. I said, age should speak, and multitudes of years should teach wisdom. But there is a spirit in man, and the breath of the Almighty gives him understanding. Great men are not always wise, nor the aged always understand justice. Therefore I say, listen to me, I also will declare my opinion. So from the get-go, kind of what is the basis for what he's going to say? What's the foundation he's given us here? Why has it taken him so long to speak up but now why does he have confidence to speak up now when he didn't before? Well, he's taken so long to speak up because he's young and they're older, and definitely culturally you don't, contradict your elders and things like that in those days. And we really would have had a similar situation until just a few years ago, a few decades ago here in our culture. Unfortunately, nowadays that's not the way things work. It's funny. When I was a lot younger, I identified with Elihu a lot more than I do now. So there we go. Now that there's gray in my beard, I'm not so sure about this guy. But how come he has confidence now?
Because the Spirit spoke to him.
Yeah, he thinks he's hearing from the Spirit of God. That's right. And he's figured just because you're old doesn't necessarily mean that you understand everything that you're talking about. And part of why he's getting mad is because from what he sees, they haven't known what they're talking about. So he's angry and he's going to talk, and the rest of chapter 32, he basically talks about how he's going to talk. Let's move up to 33. So 33, he's kind of, he wants to, he's talking to Job in 33, and he wants to be a go-between with Job. And so 33 verses 8 through 13. Surely you have spoken in my hearing. Again, he's talking to Job. And I have heard the sound of your words saying, I am pure, without transgression. I am innocent, and there is no iniquity in me. Yet he finds occasions against me, he being God, right? He counts me as his enemy. He put my feet in the stocks. He watches all my plans. Look, in this you are not righteous. I will answer you, for God is greater than man. Why do you contend with him? For he does not give accounting of any of his words. So he's accusing Job of contradicting God. He's accusing Job. He's accusing Job of seeing that God has not been just. So the first question is, from what we've read in the last few weeks, is Elihu fair in his summary of Job's position? Is that what Job is saying? Is Job saying, God has done me wrong? What do y'all think?
Well, I think that Job didn't understand why all this happened to him. And the only thing he, such a believer of God, he must have been, that something he did displeased God. And so this came upon him, disaster.
Yeah, so Job is saying, I don't understand what's happening because I can't see anything I've done wrong. And this is the way God treats people who have done wrong. But I can't understand that. Is that the same as saying God's done me dirty? No, I don't think it is either. Anybody disagree? Anybody think Job is kind of accusing God? We can have a little bit of back and forth here. That Job is accusing God of being unjust. Not yet. Job hasn't done that yet. Yeah, I don't think Elihu really is very fair here. And maybe we can make an argument that some of what Job says leads to this reasonable discussion. But Elihu seems to be taking what Job is saying in the worst possible way. And part of the reason why this is important, I kind of skipped this on our handout. There's a really hotly debated, well, I don't know how hotly, but it's definitely debated among readers of Job, students of Job, scholars of Job. And the question is Elihu kind of God's prophet? His name means God's man, right? Is he a prophet introducing God? Like he's saying these six chapters to set up God's introduction. Is that what his role is here? Or is he just a rehash of what Job's friends have been saying? Or is it something else? Like, is Elihu actually in the right here? Is he actually God's man here? That's the big question. Okay, so it doesn't seem to me, and again, we can be open to other people, other discussions here, that his summary of Job's position is fair. But let's keep going. Verse 14 of chapter 34. I'm sorry, verse 14 of chapter 33. I'm sorry. For God may speak in one way or in another, yet man does not perceive it. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls upon men while slumbering in their beds, then he opens the ears of men and seals their instruction. In order to turn man from his deed and conceal pride from man, he keeps back his soul from the pit and his life from perishing by the sword. Man is also chastened with pain on his bed and with strong pain in many of his bones, so that his life abhors bread and his soul succulent food. His flesh wastes away from sight, and his bones stick out, which once were not seen. Yet his soul draws near the pit and his life to the executioners. If there is a messenger for him, that is for man, a mediator, one among 1,000, to show man his, that is God's, uprightness, then he is gracious to him, God is gracious to man, and says, deliver him from going down to the pit. I have found a ransom. His flesh shall be young like a child's. He shall return to the days of his youth. He shall pray to God, and he will delight in him. He shall see his face for joy, for he restores to man his righteousness. Then he looks at men and says, the man that is, looks at men and says, I have sinned and perverted what was right, and it did not profit me. He will redeem his soul from going down to the pit. So God will, we can get lost in the pronouns here. God will redeem man's soul from going down to the pit, and his, that is man's, life shall see the light. So he begins by giving us ways that God speaks to people. So the question here, the two questions here is, how does God, according to Elihu, speak to people? And why does God reach out and speak to people? What's the purpose for God doing that in this chapter?
He says that God speaks to men in dreams and visions.
Dreams and visions, yeah.
And the reason is to give them instruction and keep them from danger, like falling into pit and traps.
Yeah, and the pit here is basically punishment for wickedness. So yeah, he speaks to man in dreams and visions. So we would call that special revelation, right? And he does that so that man will be instructed in God's ways, and that man would be punished a little bit now, suffer a little bit now, so that he won't suffer eternally. This is suffering as discipline, is really what Elihu's saying here. Suffering as discipline. Now, we would say, is that the only way God speaks to man? Is that even primarily the way God speaks to man? No, we have the Word of God. However, Job's this is probably possibly the oldest book of the Bible. They didn't have that yet, right? So that's one of the reasons why we do see a lot more dreams and visions. And that doesn't mean that can't happen today, but that's not the primary way God speaks to us, because we have His Word written, that record of everything. So that's something just for us to remember here already. But that doesn't mean Elihu's wrong in his context, right? They don't yet have the Torah, most likely. They certainly don't have the rest of the Bible.
One of the things that stick out his face, God can also use that pain and suffering to guide us.
Yeah, using the pain and suffering to guide us. Yeah, that's his argument here. So first of all, is that true? Does God do that? I think so. Yeah, he does do that. That doesn't mean everything that we suffer is that way, but yeah, that is something that he can do.
But in the Gospels, it says, you will not believe until you are paid the last farthing.
Mm-hmm.
I forget if that's Matthew. It was in a recent reading at Trinity.
Yeah, the pay the last farthing. Yeah, that's in one of the parables. It's in the one about not taking your brother to court.
Right.
Yeah, because
it's
yeah,
in the Gospel.
yeah,
I haven't committed them to memory. But
right. I just read that the other day, so I was like, okay, let me kind of shuffle through the stuff to make sure I'm getting the right one here. But yeah, that's the one where he says, don't take your brother to court, or settle with your brother before you go to get reconciled, because you don't want your brother taking you to court and then you end up having to pay through the nose. Yeah. So that, I would say, is not necessarily directly about this, as much as it is about kind of man's temporal justice, but God does use temporal justice. Rhoda, you were saying? Through his words, that's right. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, don't hang your hat on dreams and visions. Hang your hat on the Word of God, right? That's the objective. That's the objective. We know that's God speaking. The other stuff, maybe he is, maybe he's not. I'm not a cessationist where I say God doesn't do that anymore, but I'm very cautious because we've all seen people that get on YouTube or in front of their churches and make all these false prophecies saying God told me this, all the God told me's. Well, we know what God told me. It's right here, right? And that other stuff, maybe God did, maybe God didn't. And a lot of times the track record of those prophets is that God probably didn't do that, didn't say that. Yeah, we got to. Yeah, you got to test the prophets. Unfortunately, when those prophets are tested, they don't step down like God's word said they probably should. But
I don't know if this should be relevant, but I know, like, I guess as we're talking like this, I'm reminded of my own experience, our experience with family with health issues.
yeah,
Over the years, we're suffering through it, but it seems to me God clearly using that to get my attention, move in a certain direction.
yeah. The idea of God using our suffering or our sickness to teach us and to help guide us. That's pretty solid. Our 28 prayer books, Visitation of the Sick, was very different from what came before it. And what came before it was largely focusing on that aspect of sickness. I think they may have erred on the other side. I mean, they were like, okay, well, is this really the way we want to go talking to sick people? Okay, find out what God's trying to tell you through this. Yeah, but I understand the compassion part. So I mean, you want to have both pastorally speaking. But yeah, that is a thing. God does use the bad stuff in our lives to teach us stuff from time to time. And sometimes what he's teaching us is just, hey, endure and trust me. Other times it is something a bit more concrete. So do you think, though, and here's the next kind of follow-up on this last part of 33, this idea that God speaks through special revelation and for the purpose of guiding man and giving him some punishment now to wake him up so he doesn't get punished eternally. Is that relevant to Job's situation, do you all think? You think so?
Somewhat.
It's kind of hard to think that's the case, Joe, because he was doing so much his relationship with God was so important to him. He was doing everything to pursue that.
So there doesn't seem to be, Julius, you're saying there doesn't really seem to be an obvious relevance.
Right. It doesn't seem like he was in danger of eternal punishment.
Yeah. Yeah, he wasn't on the highway to hell. With no apologies to ACDC. But y'all are saying that there may be some relevance. What kind of relevance do you think it may have? So maybe there's not an obvious direct application, but is there some indirect, some implications?
I would say, well, if I can.
Yeah, sure, of course.
It seems like if there is a purpose, that is, it's to give a more complete revelation of who God is. Because clearly Job and his friends, they have this idea of who God is and how he is. And that if there's anything that can be gained from Job, it's a better understanding of who God is, his mercy and his love.
So we know the end of the story, right? We know the rest of the story, and from that rest of the story, we do know that God is going to use all of this to help to show Himself more clearly to all of these people, and then to us. Job doesn't know that at this point. Elihu certainly doesn't know that. So yeah, that's something to think about. Let's turn on. We only have about 10 minutes, so we might not get through all these passages, but that's okay because these are just kind of examples to help us see why Elihu is such an ambiguous character in here. And he really is very ambiguous. We're not going to solve that debate today. I'm not sure it can be. Let's turn over to 34, verse 5. For Job has said, I am righteous, but God has taken away my justice. Should I lie concerning my right? My wound is incurable, though I am without transgression. What man is like Job, who drinks scorn like water and goes in company with the workers of iniquity and walks with wicked men? For he has said, it profits a man nothing that he should delight in God. Is this what Job is saying? No, that's not what he's saying at all. Therefore, listen to me, you men of understanding. Far be it from God to do wickedness, and from the Almighty to commit iniquity. For he repays man according to his work, and makes man to find a reward according to his way. Surely God will never do wickedly, nor will the Almighty pervert justice. So Elihu's trying to defend God's justice, and he sets it up by kind of painting a false picture of Job. But that last half, verses 10 through 12 here, is that accurate? I mean, is that true? Yeah, I think it is, right? God's not going to do wickedness. He's not going to commit iniquity. He's not going to be unjust. God is just. Is this just a rehash of what Job's friends have been saying, or is this, kind of, I gave an example from chapter 8, verse 3, with something that Bildad, I think that was Bildad said. Yeah, I mean, is that just a rehash, or is he bringing something new to the conversation? Oh wait. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I think it's not exactly a rehash because Job's friends were condemning Job.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't find a cause. And Elihu is saying, hey, no matter what the situation is, no, God is just.
Okay, so Elihu's starting from a really good premise. God is just. We know that's true. So if what Job is saying is accusing God of being in the wrong in some way, then Job's off base. Whereas his friends were saying, well, because of God's justice, we know that you must be suffering punishment. Elihu's not necessarily saying that. He's just saying, it sounds to me, Job, like you're talking wrong about God. I think it is. What he's saying is not what Job was saying, but he's angry. He's the angry young man. Let's back up to verses 5 and 6. Just look at them in isolation, and then 35, 2 and 3. Job has said, I am righteous, but God has taken away my justice. Should I lie concerning my rights? My wound is incurable, though I'm without transgression. And then 35, verses 2 and 3. Do you think this is right? Do you say my righteousness is more than God's? For you say, what advantage will it be to you? What profit shall I have more than if I had sinned? So he's kind of he's saying that Job's complaint boils down to, why should I even be righteous if I'm going to be punished? But that's not really what Job has been saying at all, is it? You remember last week, Job was saying his big concern is, this seems like I've lost God's favor, and how can I go on if I'm not right with God? Like, Job's main concern isn't even his suffering. It's what that means, what that might mean for his relationship with God. Now, he's not saying, well, I might as well just sin. What good has this been to me? Job is not looking at it transactionally. Elihu thinks he is. So he hasn't really understood Job. Let's look at verses 5 through 16 and 35, and then we'll maybe throw some summary here. 5 through 16, verse chapter 35. Look to the heavens and see, behold the clouds, they're higher than you. If you sin, what do you accomplish against him? Or if your transgressions are multiplied, what do you do to him? If you're righteous, what do you give him? Or what does he receive from your hand? Your wickedness affects a man such as you, and your righteousness a son of man. Because of the multitude of oppressions they cry out for help because of the arm of the Almighty. But no one says, where is God my maker? who gives songs in the night, who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth, and makes us wiser than the birds of heaven. Therefore they cry out, but he does not answer, because the pride of evil men. Surely God will not listen to empty talk, nor will the Almighty regard it. Although you say you do not see him, yet justice is before him, and you must wait for him. And now, because he has not punished in his anger, nor taken much notice of folly, therefore Job opens his mouth in vain. He multiplies words without knowledge. So why does Elihu say that God is sometimes seems silent, sometimes seems distant?
We don't know what's going on.
Yeah, so
Where's the answer?
we're talking out of nothing. You know, we're saying empty speech in our pride, and God's just not going to put up with that. He's just going to ignore you. That's kind of his take there. You know, God's silence is often because you're too prideful to listen to him at this point. So why would God even talk to you at that point?
I think Elihu is talking about himself here. It could be applied to him.
That's a very interesting point there, Gail. Yeah, Elihu has kind of, even though he's waited for 35 chapters to talk, he is still kind of rashly speaking, isn't he? You know, he's not really listening to what Job has said,
Not listening to God either.
or to God.
And like we say in the peace of God passes all understanding.
Yeah.
I think that you boil it down, that covers this.
Yeah, there really isn't peace demonstrated here, is there? That's part of the problem, isn't it? And yeah, and God's the peace that we get from God doesn't make sense on an earthly standpoint. And I think that's probably some of what's being wrestled with here, is because everybody involved expects that it should make sense. I remember a long time ago having a discussion with a friend who had gotten all of her theology from the Jehovah's Witness translation, which is a bad idea of the Bible. Because the Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't believe in the Trinity. But part of her thing, she has kind of a very scientific mind. She thought in her mind, God wouldn't give us a revelation that makes no sense, and the Trinity just doesn't make sense. So therefore, and what's the problem there? Well, she's assuming that we're able to grasp what makes sense to God. There's a certain amount of hubris there. That's just not. I mean, but that's not the way it works. God's peace can pass understanding. God's revelation sometimes doesn't make sense, and we just have to accept it. And that's part of what is going on in the whole book, is that they want God to make sense. And the funny thing is, we're going to find out next week, God never actually answers some of those questions. A lot of it says is you can't grasp what makes sense. You can't handle the truth. No, but no, that's not really what he's saying. But okay, we got about 2 minutes. He does want, that last little bit I put out there, other questions to consider. Elihu does want Job to change his thoughts and speech about God. You can look at those verses to kind of see how. We did a very bird's eye view of Elihu because 6 chapters in 1 week, that's a bit tough. But so I think the idea that Elihu would be directly setting the ball for God to spike it is not fully true. I mean, because Elihu is saying some stuff that's just not true. However, Elihu's not doing the same thing that his friends are. Elihu's concern is not, well, Job, you must have sinned, go repent. His concern is, make sure you're talking about God the right way. It doesn't sound like you're doing that. He's not listening, but he is really concerned about God's honor. But he's not really. I think where he really errs is he doesn't understand Job, and he is speaking a bit rashly in his youth and in his anger. Like I said, when I was younger, I liked him a lot more than I do now. So there we go. Anything else before we close out Elihu? All right. Well, next week we're gonna cover the rest. So chapter 38 to the end. Mostly we're going to look at what God says in chapters 38 through 41, and then a little bit on the conclusion just to kind of see how everything ends. And we'll be done with Job. And then, like I said, we will take a week break from our wisdom literature to talk about some of those current events in the Anglican world. Because I mean, there's some really cool stuff happening, but it's easy to misunderstand them because our way we do things is a little less straightforward than some other denominations. All right, God bless you all. I'll see you next week or on Wednesday or in service or however that goes. God bless you.